Two things. That is what most people believe you need to succeed. The will to work hard and the skill to do the work. You may have both. Millions of people do. And they're still not thriving. The reason almost nobody talks about is the third thing, the one that sits between everything you have built and the result you keep expecting. Permission. Permission to thrive. Most people hear that idea and immediately feel confused. What does it mean to have permission to succeed? And more importantly, who would ever need permission in the first place? There's an equation most people have been running their entire adult lives. It sounds rational, it feels earned, and yet something important is missing. The equation says that results are a function of effort multiplied by skill. Work harder, get better, and the output grows. It is the premise behind every productivity system, every self-improvement framework, every piece of advice that has ever been delivered about success. And the equation is not wrong, it's just missing a variable. Most people never realize this. The missing variable is permission, not the kind anyone grants you from the outside, an internal permission. The level of result that some part of you has decided is the appropriate size of your life, the level where things feel right, where the unfamiliar starts to feel manageable, where the anxiety of having more than you are used to begins to quiet down. Your results are the size of your permission, not the size of your effort, not the size of your talent, the size of what you have authorized somewhere below conscious thought as the appropriate range for your existence. By the end of this video, you will understand exactly what that means, where it comes from, and why expanding your results without first expanding your permission is like trying to fill a container without ever making it larger. The idea that effort produces results is one of the most deeply embedded beliefs in human culture. It shows up in every tradition, every educational system, every family conversation about the future. Work hard, develop your skills, be consistent, stay focused, and eventually the results will come. This belief is not arbitrary. It is based on real observation. Effort does produce results. Skill does matter. Consistency does compound over time. The relationship between input and output is real, and it would be dishonest to pretend otherwise. But the belief has a hidden assumption baked into it. The assumption is that the only thing standing between a person and a larger result is a larger input. That if you're not where you want to be, the answer is always more. More work, more learning, more time, more optimization of the process. And this is where things become interesting. Because when you look at the actual behavior of people who have genuinely broken through to a new level, the pattern is not simply more of the same. Something else changed first. Before the results shifted, something internal shifted. The way they saw themselves in relation to what they were building, the level of outcome they treated as normal, the range of possibility they stopped questioning and started inhabiting. The people who believe most strongly in the effort equals results equation tend to be among the hardest workers in any room, and they're often among the most frustrated because they're running the equation correctly, checking all the inputs, and the output keeps landing in a familiar place. Not failure, just a ceiling they cannot seem to get above no matter how many variables they adjust. When this happens, the most common response is to work harder or to find a new strategy, or to conclude that the ceiling is external, that the market is difficult, the competition is unfair, the circumstances are not favorable. All of those conclusions keep the equation intact. They protect the equation from being questioned. Because questioning the equation means looking at something much closer and more uncomfortable than work ethic or market conditions. It means looking at what you actually believe you are allowed to have. And most people in a lifetime of optimizing effort and skill never arrive at that question at all. There is a pattern that shows up consistently in the lives of people who have been working hard for a long time without breaking through to a new level. It is specific enough to be recognized once you know what you are looking at, and invisible enough that most people move through it repeatedly without ever naming it. The pattern looks like this. A person works towards something, a financial goal, a career milestone, a relationship standard, a level of physical health. They make real progress, the results improve, and then at some point, something shifts. Not a dramatic collapse, not a visible failure, just a series of small decisions, each one individually justifiable, that collectively bring the result back down to a familiar range. An unexpected expense absorbs the financial progress. A professional opportunity gets passed on for reasons that seem reasonable at the time. A relationship that was genuinely working starts to develop friction that did not exist before. But here's the strange part. The level where things stabilize is not random. It is not determined by the difficulty of the goal or the quality of the effort. It is determined by a number that exists somewhere in the person's internal architecture, a sense of what is normal, what is appropriate, what is the right size for their life. Below that number, there is drive and motivation and a clear sense of direction. Above it, there is a quiet but consistent resistance that manifests as distraction, doubt, self-sabotage, or simply a loss of the urgency that was present on the way up. This is the permission level, and it operates with a precision that is almost mechanical. Consider what happens financially. A person who has always operated around a certain income level receives an unexpected increase, a raise, a good month in business, an investment that performs well. For a brief period, the number is higher than what they are used to. And then, over the following weeks or months, the expenses expand, the spending adjusts, something breaks that needs to be replaced, a decision is made that erodes the gain, and the balance returns with remarkable consistency to somewhere in the range that feels familiar. Pay close attention to what happens next. This is not because the person is irresponsible or disciplined. In many cases, they are neither. It is because the nervous system, which is always measuring the gap between your current state and what it is defined as normal, treats an unfamiliar surplus the same way it treats any other deviation from baseline, as something to correct. The result does not feel like home, and the deepest parts of the human system are always, on some level, trying to get back to where they feel they belong. The same pattern appears in professional contexts. Someone builds genuine momentum in their career. They start getting recognized, getting opportunities, operating at a level that exceeds what they started with. And somewhere in that process, they begin making choices that introduce friction. They underdeliver on something they were more than capable of delivering. They create a conflict in a relationship that was working. They step back from a visibility that was bringing them forward, claiming it doesn't feel authentic, or the timing is not right, or they need more preparation. None of these choices are made consciously. They are not decisions, they are impulses, responses to the internal signal that says the level you are at exceeds what you have authorized. And the most insidious part is that each individual impulse is defensible. The spending made sense at the time. The professional hesitation seemed prudent. The relationship friction arose from something real. It is only when you step back and look at the pattern across time that the architecture becomes visible. Once you understand this, many things start to make sense. The question is not why the results stop where they do. The question is what is setting that level in the first place? What determines the size of the permission? Where does that internal number come from? And what would it take to change it? Because understanding the mechanism is the only way to work on it directly, rather than trying endlessly to push through a ceiling you cannot see. That mechanism has a structure, and it is more observable than most people realize. To understand why the permission level holds where it does, it helps to look at three things that tend to cluster around any result that persists in your life. Not as a formal framework, just as an observation, a way of seeing what is actually operating beneath the surface of any situation that keeps repeating. The three things are these. Whatever persists in your life tends to carry something you need from it, something you permit it to occupy, and something you, at a deeper level, prefer about it over the alternative. Not consciously, not deliberately, but functionally, in the way a system reveals its preferences not through what it says, but through what it keeps producing. This observation is not comfortable, but it is precise. And precision is more useful here than comfort. Start with need. A result that consistently stays below a certain level tends to provide something: safety, familiarity. the absence of the specific kind of scrutiny that comes with visible success, the comfort of not having outgrown the people around you, the stability of not taking a risk that could be judged. Need does not always announce itself clearly. It operates in the background, quietly maintaining conditions that feel more manageable than the alternative. This is the part that most people get completely wrong. They interpret the need as weakness, as something to be ashamed of or overcome through force of will. But the need is not a character flaw. It is a rational response to a set of conditions the mind learned to navigate. If growing beyond a certain level historically produced social friction, isolation, or the loss of connection with people who mattered, then the part of your mind responsible for managing those risks learned to treat that level as a boundary. The need to stay within it is not irrational. It is protective. It is just no longer accurate. The second element is permission. This is the one that sits most directly between where you are and where you want to go. Permission, in this context, is the internal authorization that allows a result to exist without triggering the correction mechanism. When the result is within your permission range, it feels right. It does not produce the anxiety of having more than you are used to, or the guilt of having surpassed a level that feels socially significant, or the fear of now being responsible for maintaining something larger than what you have managed before. When the result exceeds your permission range, the system moves to restore equilibrium. Not through conscious decision, but through the accumulated weight of 100 small choices that each feel locally reasonable and collectively bring the level back down to where it belongs. The third element is the most counterintuitive and the most important: preference. At some level, what persists in your life is what you prefer over the alternative. Not in the surface sense of what you enjoy or desire, in the deeper sense of what your system has determined is safer, more manageable, more consistent with the version of yourself you have been operating as. This is not masochism, it is familiarity. The brain does not distinguish clearly between familiar and safe. What it has experienced before, it knows how to navigate. What it has not experienced before carries an ambient risk, regardless of how objectively desirable it might be. A result that is larger than what you are used to is, at a neurological level, territory you do not have a map for. And territory without a map activates caution even when the territory is objectively benign. This is why people who achieve sudden large results without having expanded their permission level first tend not to keep them. The stories are familiar enough. A person who comes into significant money and loses it within a few years. Someone who reaches a high level of professional visibility and systematically dismantles it. A relationship, by every measure, is the healthiest they have ever been in, and they find a way to make it collapse. These are not failures of effort or intelligence. They are failures of permission. The result exceeded what the person had authorized, and the system corrected. The architecture is not fixed. Needs change when the conditions that generated them change. Permission expands when exposure to a new level of result makes it gradually familiar. Preferences shift when the cost of staying where you are becomes higher than the cost of moving. But none of these shifts happen automatically. They happen through a specific kind of attention, the kind that looks directly at the internal level rather than at the external circumstances as the primary variable.
There's one more thing worth noting about this architecture. When someone does expand their permission range and sustains a new level of result, something changes that does not change back, even if the result itself temporarily regresses. The transformation in perception is irreversible. A person who has genuinely operated at a higher level, even briefly, carries that experience as a reference point. They know, in a way that cannot be unknown, that the level is reachable, that the anxiety it produced did not destroy them, that the discomfort of the unfamiliar had a ceiling of its own, and they passed through it. This means that a regression in results, if it happens, is fundamentally different after a permission expansion than before one. Before, the familiar level feels like home. After, it feels like a temporary return to territory you have already moved beyond. The map has been updated, and a person navigating with an updated map, even in difficult terrain, is in a completely different position than someone who has never seen the territory at all. Your results are the size of your permission. That is not a metaphor. It is a description of a mechanism. and mechanisms can be understood, examined, and worked with in a way that character flaws and circumstantial bad luck never can. Permission does not exist only inside a person. It exists in relationship to everything around them. And one of the most consistent and least discussed dynamics in human behavior is the way social groups, family, peer network, professional community, cultural context, operate within an implicit range of acceptable outcomes. Not a written rule, not an articulated standard, just a shared sense, reinforced through thousands of small interactions over time of what's normal here, what kind of success is usual, what level of ambition is respectable, how far is too far. This is the part that most people get completely wrong. They think about permission as entirely personal, a matter of self-belief or psychological history or individual limitation, and while all of those elements are real, they exist inside a social container that is constantly exerting pressure on the level. The container has its own permission range, and when a member of the group starts operating outside of it, the container responds. The response is rarely hostile. It almost never announces itself as resistance to your growth. It arrives as concern, as questions about whether you are being realistic, whether you are moving too fast, whether you have thought through what you are taking on. It arrives as a change in the energy of the people closest to you when you talk about what you are building. A slight withdrawal, a silence where enthusiasm used to be, a comment delivered with apparent care that lands with the weight of a warning. What is actually happening in those moments is the group recalibrating. Your movement beyond the group's permission range creates a gap, and gaps in social systems produce pressure to close. Not because anyone is consciously trying to hold you back, because the system is doing what social systems do, which is maintain coherence, preserve familiarity, protect the shared sense of what normal looks like here. The people who navigate this most effectively tend to share a specific quality. They are not indifferent to the group. They do not become cold or dismissive or self-contained in a way that severs connection, but they have developed a stable enough internal reference point that the group's recalibration does not rewrite their own. They can hold two things at once: genuine care for the people around them and genuine clarity about the direction they are moving in. The friction between those two things does not resolve by choosing one over the other. It resolves by holding both without letting either one collapse. There is also a dynamic that operates in the other direction, and it is one of the most reliable accelerators of permission expansion available. When you spend significant time around people whose permission range is larger than your own, something shifts, not through advice or instruction, simply through proximity and normalization. The human mind calibrates what is possible largely through what it observes as normal in the people around it. When the people in your immediate environment routinely operate at a level that currently feels beyond your permission range, that level stops feeling extraordinary. The threat response that activates when you approach your own ceiling begins to soften, because the ceiling you are bumping against is not the ceiling of the people next to you. It is just the floor of the next level. And floors are easier to step onto than ceilings are to break through. This is not about finding a more successful crowd to perform for. It is about recalibrating the internal sense of what is ordinary. A person for whom a certain level of result is completely unremarkable does not carry the anxiety about that level that someone for whom it represents foreign territory does. That absence of anxiety is itself a form of permission, and it is contagious in the best possible sense. Understanding these social dynamics does not mean becoming strategic about relationships in a cold or calculating way. It means recognizing that the permission level you carry is not formed in isolation. It is formed in context, and changing the context, even partially, even gradually, is one of the most direct ways to change the level. It also means understanding that the social friction you encounter when you begin to expand your permission range is not a sign that you are doing something wrong. It is a predictable feature of any genuine expansion. The friction is the group's recalibration mechanism in action. It is the social equivalent of the internal correction mechanism, an attempt to restore a familiar equilibrium. And just as the internal mechanism loses its grip as the new level becomes more familiar, the social friction tends to diminish as the people around you update their sense of what is normal for you. This does not always happen quickly, and some relationships do not survive the update. Not because growth destroys connection, but because some connections were built on a shared permission range that no longer describes both people equally. That is a real loss, and it deserves to be acknowledged as one, but it is a different kind of loss than failure. It is the cost of a genuine expansion, paid in the currency of relationships that required you to stay the same in order to continue. And that cost, as painful as it is, tends to look different in retrospect than it does in the moment. There are two shifts that matter when it comes to expanding the permission level. Not tactics, not a sequence of steps, two changes in the way you see what is happening when you approach your ceiling, changes that make it possible to work with the mechanism rather than against it. The first shift is learning to distinguish between a real limit and a permission limit. Real limits are constraints that exist in the external world: time, capital, specific skills you do not yet have, access to relationships or information that is genuinely unavailable. Real limits respond to resources. Add the missing resource, and the limit moves. They are also, in most cases, clearly identifiable. You can point to them, you can measure them, you can build a plan around addressing them. Permission limits are different. They do not respond to resources because the resource was never the actual constraint. A permission limit produces a very specific internal experience. You are capable of the next step. The opportunity is available, the resources are sufficient, and something inside you still will not move. Or it moves and then retreats, or it produces a version of the result that is slightly smaller than what was possible. That experience, that specific quality of capable but not moving, is the signature of a permission limit, not a real one. Most people never realize this. The reason this distinction matters is that real limits and permission limits require completely different responses.
Applying effort to a real limit moves it. Applying effort to a permission limit tends to produce anxiety, burnout, and the frustrating experience of working very hard to stay in the same place. The problem was never the effort level. The problem was the authorization level. And authorization does not change through force. It changes through familiarity. Which leads directly to the second shift, understanding that expanding permission is a process of gradual exposure, not a single decision. The permission level is not raised by wanting a larger result more intensely. Intensity of desire does not change the internal calibration. What changes it is repeated, sustained contact with the level you want to normalize until that level stops triggering the threat response and starts registering as ordinary. This is a slow process. It is also a reliable one. Consider what actually happens in the lives of people who sustain a significant shift in their results over time. Almost universally, there was a period before the results changed when something else was already changing. Their environment shifted in a way that introduced them to a new level of ordinary. Or they made a commitment that forced them to operate, even imperfectly, at a level beyond their comfort. Or they had an extended experience of being around people for whom their aspirations were unremarkable. In each case, the permission expanded first. The results followed. This does not mean waiting passively for permission to arrive before taking action. It means understanding that action taken at the edge of the current permission range, even uncomfortable action, even imperfect action, is the mechanism of expansion. Every time you move slightly beyond where you feel authorized and the anticipated catastrophe does not occur, the range of what feels manageable expands. Not dramatically, not all at once, but consistently in the direction of a larger normal. The implication of this is that the question to ask is not, how do I get a bigger result? The more precise question is, what level of result am I currently running on permission for, and what would it take to make the next level feel like something I belong in? The first question points outward to strategies and efforts and circumstances. The second question points inward to the only variable that actually determines the ceiling. Your effort is not the constraint. Your skill is not the constraint. The size of what you have authorized is the constraint. And authorization, unlike effort, is not something you push through. It is something you expand, gradually, intentionally, by making the unfamiliar familiar 1 degree at a time. There is a number worth identifying, not dramatically, just honestly.
Think about the level where your results consistently land. Not the best result you have ever achieved, the outlier, the exceptional moment, the thing that happened once and has not been repeated. The level where things tend to stabilize. The range that shows up again and again across months and years. The level your life returns to when the exceptional moment has passed. That level is not a reflection of your maximum capability. It is a reflection of your current permission range. This is worth sitting with. Not with self-criticism, with curiosity, because the gap between that number and the number you tell yourself you are aiming for is information. It is not evidence of failure or limitation or a deficiency in your character. It is a measurement. It tells you the distance between where your permission currently sits and where you are directing your effort. An effort directed above the permission range does not produce proportional results. It produces the frustrating experience of working hard and landing in the same place. Most people, when they encounter this gap, respond by increasing the effort. They decide the problem is intensity or consistency or strategy. They restructure their approach, they recommit, and for a period, the energy of recommitment produces movement. But eventually, the movement arrives at the permission range again, and the ceiling reasserts itself, and the frustration returns, and the cycle continues. The realization that changes this is not motivational, it is structural. The ceiling is not a character judgment, it is not a verdict on your worth or your potential. It is a setting, a calibration, something that was established over time in a specific context in response to specific experiences, and that has been running in the background ever since, quietly determining where your results are allowed to land. Settings can be changed, not by deciding to feel differently about them, not by willing them into a new position, but by understanding what they are made of, where they came from, and what it would mean specifically and concretely to operate one level above them until that level becomes the new ordinary. Think about one area of your life where the result has been consistent for longer than you can justify with external circumstances, where the explanation for the ceiling has shifted over the years, but the ceiling itself has stayed in roughly the same place, where effort has been applied, strategy has been revised, and yet the level persists. That persistence is the signature of a permission limit, not a real one, a constructed one. And what was constructed has a structure, and structures, once visible, can be worked with in a way that invisible forces never can. There is something clarifying about arriving at this recognition.
When you believe the ceiling is external, the work is diffuse. You adjust circumstances, change strategies, look for the right conditions. The work has no clear center. But when you recognize that the ceiling is internal, the work becomes specific. It has a location, it has a mechanism, and it points directly at the one variable that actually determines the outcome. Not what you are doing, but what you have authorized. That specificity is not a burden, it is a relief, because a problem with a clear location is a problem you can actually address. The question worth carrying forward is not, why has this not changed? The question is, what level of result have I actually authorized here? And what would it take to expand that authorization by 1 degree? There is a version of self-improvement that is built entirely on the premise that you need to do more efforts, more consistency, more sacrifice, more optimization. And there is a version of this that is real and necessary. Discipline matters, skill matters, showing up when it is inconvenient matters. None of that is in question. But there is a point at which doing more in the same direction stops being a strategy and starts being a way of avoiding the actual question. And the actual question is not how much are you willing to work, it is how much are you willing to have. Those are not the same question, and they do not have the same answer. The willingness to work is, for most people who have reached a certain level of self-awareness, not the limiting factor. The willingness to have is. The willingness to sustain a result that exceeds the familiar range. The willingness to exist without apology and without the compulsion to correct at a level that does not yet feel like home. The willingness to sit with the specific discomfort of having more than your system has defined as appropriate, without immediately finding a way to give it back. And this is where things become interesting, because the willingness to have is not built the way the willingness to work is built. You cannot train it through repetition the same way you train a habit. You cannot will it into existence through commitment and intensity. It grows through something quieter, through the gradual accumulation of evidence that the next level does not destroy you, that having more does not cost you the things that matter most, that the anxiety that comes with unfamiliar territory is not a signal that you have done something wrong. It is a signal that you are somewhere new, and new, with enough time, becomes ordinary.
This is the work that most productivity frameworks do not address, not because it is not important, but because it is not visible. It does not produce a plain progress metric. It does not feel like working. It feels like waiting, like adjusting, like the slow and sometimes uncomfortable process of letting a new level of results become normal before you know for certain that it will stay. There is a particular kind of patience required here that is different from the patience of waiting for a result to arrive. It is the patience of allowing a result that has already arrived to settle, to stop treating it as temporary, to stop managing it back down to the familiar range because the unfamiliar range produces a discomfort you do not yet know how to carry. Your results are the size of your permission. Not a permanent size, not a fixed size, a current size. One that reflects where your internal authorization sits today, in this moment, shaped by everything that has formed you up to this point. That size is not your verdict. It is your starting point. The ceiling you recognized in the last conversation, the one built by other people, by the slow accumulation of signals about how far you are allowed to go, that ceiling was inherited. It came from outside and worked its way in until it felt like the truth about what was possible for you. The ceiling you are facing now is different. This one is yours, built not through someone else's discomfort with your growth, but through your own system's preference for the familiar over the possible. That distinction matters, because a ceiling that was placed on you by someone else requires you to understand its origins before you can dismantle it. But a ceiling that your own system constructed can be moved by your own system, deliberately, incrementally, with the specific intention of making the next level feel like something you belong in. That is not an overnight process, but it is a real one. And it begins not with more effort directed at the result, but with more honesty directed at the level, at the number where things consistently stop, at the range that keeps reasserting itself regardless of the strategy applied to it, at the size that your life currently is, not because that is all you were capable of, but because that is all you have authorized so far. The authorization can change. It changes the same way any deeply held internal position changes, through experience that contradicts the assumption, sustained long enough that the assumption loses its grip.
You already have the will. You already have the skill. The third thing is available too. It was always available. It was just waiting for you to stop treating it as something that would arrive on its own and start treating it as something you have the authority to expand. That authority was never outside you. It was always here. And the next question, the one about what it looks like to actively expand that authorization in a specific area with the specific friction that comes from moving beyond the familiar, that is exactly what comes next. Not as a promise of ease, not as a motivational endpoint, as the next honest step in a process that began the moment you first named the ceiling. The naming was the beginning. The expansion is the work. And the work, as it turns out, is less about pushing harder and more about allowing further, allowing the result to exist, allowing the new level to settle,
allowing the unfamiliar to become, through patient and deliberate exposure, the new version of ordinary. That is where the size of your permission changes. And when the permission changes, everything that follows it changes too.